Hello, I'm David Harper with the BBC News. A UN report says Afghanistan's economy has contracted by a quarter since the Taliban recaptured the country in August last year. The UN Development Programme says it took less than a year to wipe out $5 billion of GDP built up in the previous decade. Charles Haviland reports.
The UN Development Programme says Afghanistan has suffered a catastrophic economic collapse in 14 months. It said the Taliban's restrictions on women in the workforce have meant a 5% cut in national output. The price of a basic food basket has risen by 35%, and 19 out of 20 Afghans now live below the poverty line, with a fifth of children at risk of severe malnutrition. Before the Taliban takeover, 3/4 of government spending was dependent on foreign aid. This income is largely suspended since the seizure.
President Zelensky has insisted that Ukraine's counter-offensive against Russian forces is continuing to gain ground. In his nightly address, Mr. Zelensky said 3 more villages were liberated in the southern Kherson region on Wednesday, as Ukrainian troops bear down on the regional capital. President Biden has criticised the decision of OPEC Plus to cut oil production, calling it short-sighted. The group of major oil producers, which includes Saudi Arabia and Russia, announced the biggest reduction in output in more than 2 years, immediately pushing up prices to 3-week highs. Our North America business correspondent Michelle Fleury explains why OPEC ignored the US and decided to reduce output.
On the one hand, it certainly could benefit Russia insofar as it undermines attempts by the G7 to introduce a price cap on Russian oil. That's all part of their efforts to try and stop Russia from funding its invasion of Ukraine. But I think the other factor in all of this we shouldn't forget is Saudi Arabia, the world's largest crude oil producer, and they, simply put, want to keep the price higher. At the moment, Brent crude is trading around $90 a barrel. 3 months ago or so, it was trading above $120 a barrel.
The United States has strongly criticised Russia and China, accusing them of being enablers for North Korea by protecting it from stronger UN Security Council sanctions. At a council meeting called to discuss Pyongyang's test firing of a ballistic missile over Japan on Tuesday, the US ambassador said Moscow and Beijing had given North Korea blanket protection by vetoing tougher restrictions last May. Russia's deputy ambassador to the UN, Anna Evstegyeva, says increased dialogue was better than punishments.
We have stated many times and are repeating it again, introducing new sanctions against North Korea is a dead end. We are convinced that the UN and Security Council mechanisms need to be used to support inter-Korean dialogue and multilateral negotiations, rather than becoming an impediment to them.
BBC News. The financial agency Fitch has lowered Britain's credit rating outlook to negative because of the new government's plans to cut tax through increased borrowing. Describing the measures as large and unfunded fiscal package without independent evaluation, Fitch said they could lead to a significant increase in deficits. Fitch's downgrade follows similar action by Standard & Poor's last week. Burkina Faso's coup leader Ibrahim Traoré has assumed the presidency following last week's seizure of power by military officers. A statement read on national television said Mr. Traoré, an army captain, was also appointed supreme head of the armed forces. The power grab, the second this year, was triggered by apparent disaffection with the failures of the previous military government to curb a spreading Islamist insurgency. The Mexican foreign minister says he will file a new lawsuit in the United States seeking responsibility from gun manufacturers for the cross-border flow of firearms. Mexico had long accused American gun makers of designing and marketing weapons with cartels in mind, a charge the firms deny. Will Leonardo reports.
Addressing senators, the minister Marcelo Ebrard said the quantity of guns crossing the border from the United States made it impossible to reduce Mexico's endemic violence. The new lawsuit, to be filed in Arizona, comes a week after a US court threw out a similar case in Boston seeking $10 billion in damages from gun manufacturers. The judge cited a US law that largely bars gun makers from being held liable for how their products are used. Mexico has far stricter firearms legislation than its northern neighbour, yet it has the world's third highest number of gun-related deaths.
The Turks and Caicos Islands, a British overseas territory in the West Indies, is reported to have asked Jamaica for assistance as it struggles with rising violent crime. The criminality is linked to Jamaican gangs stepping up their activity there. Jamaica's police commissioner said bilateral talks on the problem were already being held. BBC News.